Good afternoon. Welcome to the Monday edition of Metro Business Week live on Metro TV. My name is Winston Taki. We are coming to you live on channel 277 on DSTV and across all our social media handles. Now, here we say facts and figures made simple. But today, on the conversation that is quite critical across Africa, as 5 African countries have declared visa-free for all Africans. This is good news for those who love to travel across the continent and explore the possibility of having a different experience, cultural, storage sites, and tourism, all that is related to traveling. But the key focus has to do with building a resilient African economy in the midst of the African Continental Free Trade Area. So today, we'll be focusing on whether the removal of visa restrictions and all the moving African passport. With this being said, there are over 54 African countries on the continent, with 5 declaring this. What about the remaining African countries? What are the possibilities available for such a decision? These and more we'll be discussing here today on Metro Business Week. Stage are delving into the case of policy, especially visa-free countries. We'll give you the opportunity to also call into the show. Let us hear what you think, whether it's a great idea for Ghana, for Nigeria, for other African countries to jump on board, since Rwanda and Kenya have also joined the 3 other African countries. We'll go detail into that shortly. But we are joined on the Zoom by the Group Managing Director for ETK Group in the person of Bolaji Sofolue. She is currently in London and joins us on Zoom for more insight on this particular topic. Good afternoon, Bolaji. Kindly unmute right now, please, so that we can hear you clear.
Sorry. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me on the show this afternoon.
Great. It's great to have you as well. Now, we would like to, first of all, go straight into the conversation because of time, but kind of enlighten us the call for visa removal for across Africa. We've seen some African countries taking the bold decision. And what do you think is delaying or being the main reason why some African countries are rather dragging their feet before deciding why this is very critical?
So once again, thank you so much for having me on the program. I think the first things first that we need to look at is how long ago it was that these countries came together to decide that there will be free movement of people across the continent. The 1991 Abuja Treaty was the foundation for the protocol that they've set up for people to move across the continent freely, because the African presidents at the time and the heads of government believed that in order for Africa to trade effectively with one another, intra-Africa trade to increase, that people needed to be able to move around freely. And so when the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement was ratified, it was one of the key elements, the key protocols that were brought to the fore on this agenda, because they knew that this was critical to achieving the goals of the free trade area. Now, we're very excited to see that the announcements that took place last week from Rwanda and Kenya is a step in the right direction, but we still need to see a lot of other countries agreeing to do the same.
In as much as you've made insight about the benefit that some may drive, what other benefits does this put or position Africa in the midst of trade, especially with other continents such as Europe?
Well, the good thing about a free trade area is the fact that you then start to negotiate as a whole instead of in parts. And Africa's joint negotiation power is stronger than the individual countries' negotiation power. And, we're not ignorant. Africa is by no means a holistic market. It still has its individual countries as well as the individual opportunities within those countries. But at least it gives African leaders the opportunity to come together and look at how they can leverage on the opportunities that they have within their markets and present a better trade opportunity to other parts of the world, and then potentially increase the free flow of trade from Africa to the rest of the world.
We've seen the case in the United States where some where the government is currently struggling to contain immigrants into the country. There's been calls for border control in some parts of the United States, even Mexico. But with these coming on board, do you think Africa has the infrastructure or logistics to handle, especially if a country decides to open its borders to other Africans?
I think one thing we need to bear in mind is that at the moment there are 21 million documented Africans living in other African countries. So, and that's just documented Africans. So, migration across the continent has been happening over the years. No one was actually waiting for anyone to blow a whistle for people to sort of rush into specific countries. So I do understand that there is a concern around the infrastructure, whether that's the social infrastructure, whether it's the healthcare infrastructure, or whether it's even availability of jobs and opportunities for these people who might be moving in to new markets. I understand the concern around that, but that's why I think that there needs to be careful planning put in place before governments make these decisions or make these announcements. And that careful planning needs to include how the governments can actually make the best use of these people moving into their countries.
You hit on job, and that is a very critical one because currently the issue of brain drain, where most developed countries are actually marketing the prospects on their continent compared to Africa. When this happened, where most Nigerians and other sub-Saharan or West African countries decided to move southwards, especially in South Africa, we saw the case of xenophobic attacks. This was quite critical and became intense, where most lives were lost during this period. With this policy, would there have been a better way to handle it?
Okay. Well, that's a very good question. Now, you need to look at the root cause of xenophobia. Xenophobia usually arises when another group of people feel that they have been disadvantaged by the movement of other people into a specific market, for whatever reason that might be. Now, in this particular case that I feel you're talking about, it was a situation where there was a policy that was put in place to sort of, if you like, level up communities that had been disadvantaged in the past. But that policy was not intricate enough in its detail to specifically state the race of those people that they were trying, the origins of those people that they were trying to elevate. And so what happened was that where there were situations where certain jobs were available to a particular ethnic group, those jobs were then given to people coming from outside of that specific country. So again, you know, this is back down to planning and ensuring that policy is put in place deliberately and intentionally. And so if you feel if a group of people feel that they are being you know, that they're losing out on opportunities in their own country, of course it's going to lead to bitterness. Of course it's going to lead to xenophobia. And I think African leaders need to have open conversations about this and plan properly on how they can make sure that their own people are not disadvantaged at the end of the day, but begin to see the advantages of the diversity in their populations.
Oh, that's a very good one there, Bolaji. But now I want to also understand this year, actually, there's been a lot of coup d'etat in most African countries, and that was a major concern where people feared the spillover of such instability in their borders. And with these free border controls, you mentioned that indeed these are conversations that leadership should have. But if the leadership don't comprehend the essence of this policy, how do they then begin or go forward in moving this agenda?
So again, it comes down to communication and managing expectations. I think what needs to happen is that there needs to be dialogue with people. They need to open up town halls, conversations about how this is going to affect mainly the border areas of these countries, as well as the urban areas where you've got cities like Lagos that are already overrun. You know, the population density is at an all-time high in that city, and you've got places like Nairobi and Johannesburg and in Cape Town, and all of these places that already are grappling to manage, like I said, their social infrastructure. So I think it's really important for governments to dialogue with their people and for the people themselves, whether that's in the private sector. So for instance, if there are people coming into the country that I know have certain skills in my business, I then know that there's certain opportunities for me to go into, or if I was importing a certain skill before, I can now locally source resources that can take on those opportunities within my business. So individual businesses, um, and cities, states, region, at whatever level it is, need to come together and deliberately plan for the influx of people, because there will be movements. And like you said about insecurity and instability across certain regions, definitely this will be the cause for people to attempt to look for greener pastures. But again, we have to consider the holistic viewpoint on all of this, the reason why this is happening in the first place, which is to create more balanced development across the continent. And so if we're trying to create balance, then there must be very careful planning involved.
Well said, Bolaji. Now, you are in Europe at the moment, and in your submission, I can conclude and say that a united front gives us a united force, based on what you've just made mention of. And from the Europe's perspective, what is keeping the continent moving so far?
I think, well, as you know, I'm in England, so Brexit happened a couple of years ago, and to a lot of businesses on this side, it was devastating because it created all sorts of bottlenecks and barriers for trading with the EU. And, it then became very attractive for companies to set up subsidiary offices on the continent from the UK, so that they still had access to that market. They still had access to such a significantly sized market. So again, from our perspective on this side, we see how Europe can come together and develop policies in the best interest of a broader population and a broader market. Obviously, because of that, there's competition. You're not just competing with someone in England, you're now competing with somebody. Say England was still part of the EU, you're not just competing with someone in England, you're now competing with a company in the Netherlands, with a company, in France, in Germany. And so that meant that price competitiveness was much better. And so people could access goods and services at reasonable prices. What you're seeing in the UK at the moment is a significant amount of inflation because, things are a lot harder to bring into the country from the mainland. So these are some of the things that, these are some of the effects, like you said, sort of breaking things down without making it complicated. But these are some of the effects that Brexit has had on the UK. But again, as Europe, as a bloc, they continue to move, they continue to do well. Goods and services can move across borders. And of course, because of that, you create more choice. And as a result, you create, better living standards as well.
When the Brexit conversation began, and most people prospected, especially projected, that Britain would certainly fall because as an island, it doesn't have the prospect as an economy to stand on its own. But here they are, a year is Europe also vying for themselves and surviving so far.
Okay, I think that's relative. I think you'll find that the people who live here are, really struggling. There is a cost of living crisis right here on the ground in the UK. We had the perfect storm, didn't we? We had Brexit, we had the pandemic, we had the COVID pandemic, and then we had the Ukraine war on Europe's mainland. So all of these things combined have actually affected the growth of the UK economy, and we're still trying to make those numbers to bring down inflation, as well as the cost of mortgages. At the moment, the interest rates are sitting at around 6% as an average rate. So of course, it's preventing people from getting onto the mortgage, the house market. So some of these housing markets. So some of these things are actually affecting the UK economy. I think we will get to the other side, but I think it's taken a lot longer than what was previously anticipated before all these other external pressures were introduced.
Yeah, I would like to know, you have seen a lot of young businesses, some from Africa, some also outside Europe. Now, what opportunity would this visa removal of these restrictions provide for young businesses, especially small and medium-scale enterprises?
Look, I'm really excited about this particular prospect because I think that, like I said, I have seen what being able to trade with a larger market, with a larger customer base can do for business. And I can just begin to even imagine what would happen for small and medium-sized enterprises that now have access to international markets within the continent. So when I say within the continent, it means that they can offer relevant products and services into these markets that could potentially do well because they're similar, you find similar circumstances in each of these markets, similar market conditions. So I think that it's a great opportunity. But again, you have the bigger problem of connectivity and infrastructure. If Africa does not invest heavily in the infrastructure that will connect each of these countries, it could still present a problem. And you still find that Africa is trading 85% of its goods and services outside of the continent rather than within.
Africa has been singing the song of the need for an industrialized continent. You made mention of infrastructure, and most governments' policy consistently seems to be hitting on the social aspect. Which specific industries do you believe should be the starting point for such an industrial revolution in order to capitalize upon these trade markets available for the continent?
I think we need to focus on adding value to our commodities, whether that's, our, agri commodities or whether it is our minerals. Africa is very blessed with mineral resources. Obviously, I'm sure you've noticed the trend on the internet right now, sort of shining a light on the cobalt industry in the DRC. I believe that if the DRC were to ensure that there are, manufacturing companies within that country that are taking advantage of that mineral resource, then they will be subject to certain standards, international standards, to produce, to mine that material as well. So I think we need to first of all take a long, hard look at our raw materials and resources and think about how we can add value to them.
Bolaji, do you believe the youth are ready to champion this cause? And possibly because they say the youth are the future of the continent and they are the huge prospect, possibly the huge capital resource base of the continent. Are they ready based on your assessment?
Yes, I think they're ready. I think there no the determination of entrepreneurs on the continent is unrivaled. Anywhere I look around the world, anywhere I travel to, and I do travel quite a lot for work, I don't find the same fire and passion that I find every time I touch down in an African market. I think the youth are ready. I think we're inventive enough on the continent. I think people have great ideas, African solutions to African problems. I think that there is a great opportunity for the youth to step up and industrialize and possibly right the wrongs of the generations before them when it comes to Africa. I think particularly the tech industry is booming, but also you're seeing soft manufacturing, hard manufacturing industries emerging from even the most unlikely places. So I think the youth are definitely ready.
Let me chip in. In your initial submission, you raised issues about infrastructure, and the African Continental Free Trade Area seems to provide the leverage, the cushion for most African countries to capitalize upon. With the onset of the trade, which began last year till now, there's been this policy about the Pan-African payment and system. Are we there yet? And if we are, with the case of common currency, is there a too far a call to begin now?
I think we need to take things one step at a time. A common currency is, I think, several years off, to be honest, just because of the disparity in economic circumstances across the continent. But I do think that perhaps is a step in the right direction. I think, the first barrier to trading across the continent is payments, isn't it? And so the fact that someone had to pay someone in Namibia from Angola and would have to send the money first to some bank in New York was preposterous. And so I think perhaps is definitely the right sort of system to put in place to facilitate this trade. But that's the soft infrastructure. What I'm talking about as well is, that hard infrastructure that needs to be put in place, the rail links across the continent, the road links across the continent. And I know that there's some projects currently ongoing that address this issue, but I think there needs to be a lot more. But again, because there's now a continental free trade area, there's better negotiation for long-term infrastructure capital from on the parts of bodies like the AFC, the AFDB, etc., to be able to leverage on the joint opportunity that Africa as a whole brings to get these kinds of projects off the ground.
Well, I understand you have a very important meeting shortly, but before you go, any last words for us, possibly?
I think, you've rightly said that Africa is now in the hands of the youth. And I think, right now we just need to grab hold of these opportunities with both hands. Like I said, we need to right the wrongs of the previous generations. We've had a leadership problem across the continent, as you probably well know. We still have leadership issues around the continent, but there's some bright sparks around that are worth emulating and definitely capitalizing on. And I really hope that that would be the case and that the Free Continental Trade Area will be a tremendous success. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure having you today on the Metro Business Week. We'll most definitely be connecting with you subsequently for more discussions. Oluwe is the Group Managing Director for ETK Group, and join us to discuss the removal of visa across Africa. If we have a borderless Africa, the prospect and opportunities that will provide for the continent, for each countries, with a united force, we can do more to trade globally.